Welcome to the pod focusing on the aftermath and recovery from the devastating Palisades Fires of January 2025. Journalist Joel Pollack, entrepreneur Oren Ezra, and technology expert Ron Goldschmidt serve up to the moment vital news and information, discuss the ongoing recovery efforts, and introduce us to the individuals and trades who are playing key roles in rebuilding our cherished communities. We're diving into the deep end and learning quickly how we can move forward together. We know the pain because we're living real-time news, stories, resources, and insights on the ongoing recovery effort. Buckle up. We're three homeless guys.
Welcome to Three Homeless Guys, the podcast about the Palisades Fire and the rebuilding effort. I'm journalist Joel Pollack here with technology expert Ron Goldschmidt and entrepreneur Oren Ezra. And we have a very special edition of the podcast this evening. It's about the origin of the Palisades Fire, and there has been no cause identified as of yet. We're now speaking in early April, almost 3 months after the fire took place. And we've brought one of our neighbors on the show who is one of the people who's done the most research into what could have caused the fire, because he was right there at the beginning and was one of the first people to notice it. He is an associate professor of biology at the University of Southern California, USC, Andrew Hires. He's a neurobiologist and also a great neighbor. And Andrew, we got to know each other over the course of the last 3 months. Our wives apparently knew each other well before then, and we actually ran into your family as we were evacuating to Santa Monica in the CVS there. We were all just scrounging for toiletries and things like that after evacuating, watching the smoke in the distance rather nervously. And you were one of the only people who understood the scale of the disaster that was about to happen, because you were telling people Santa Monica itself might not be safe. And in fact, an hour or two after you posted that on X, on social media, there were evacuation orders in Santa Monica. So you had a handle on this fire very, very early, and I began following everything you were posting about it, and that led to us talking about the possible origins of the fire, and that brings you here. But let me give you a chance to introduce yourself and talk about your background and what brought you to study the origin of the fire.
Well, I mean, my background is basically, I grew up in the Midwest and met my wife on an airplane and ended up in Southern California. What a great location. We're super happy. We've been in the Palisades for the last decade. First in the Marquez Knolls, and then moved over to the Highlands on Peter Murata about 3 years ago. And during the course of events, right, that particular day, right, or the day before, really, like there was such strong evidence that there was going to be a truly epic wind event that I got very worried. And then the day of, right, we were having all sorts of conversations in our WhatsApp chats, and having it actually happen, the actual fire, and like the worst case scenario, actually 10 times worse than the worst case scenario that unfurled, really made me interested. And I wanted to sort of keep a contemporaneous notes as the day went on Twitter, right, of what was going on, and try to sort of share the knowledge of what I was thinking at the time out to the public. So I guess that's the history behind that.
So you have lived in the Highlands for quite some time, and as you and I have explored some of the burn area, I've been impressed by your incredible and detailed knowledge of the bicycle trails, of some of the hiking trails, of the terrain. You really know and love those mountains, and you have shown me trails there that I didn't even know existed. So you had this intimate familiarity with the landscape, and you knew that the wind was going to be extreme. Just tell us about the unique confluence of events that made this particular Santa Ana wind so much stronger than the normal Santa Ana wind we're used to experiencing in winter.
That is a really important point that you make, that this is an extremely unusual event. And you have, sort of, I guess, weather personalities on Twitter like Daniel Swain, these like postdocs that are really into weather, were advertising that Los Angeles National Weather Service was like sending out alerts a few days ahead of time, and really send out very serious alerts a day or two in advance. And the reason why they were doing that is because most Santa Ana conditions are you have some sort of high pressure system over the Great Basin, like Utah, Nevada, lower pressure off the coast of California. And that tends to push winds down from a high pressure to low pressure, right? You're going to move down the pressure gradient, and it's going to bring winds across the mountains and cause 30 mile an hour, 40 mile an hour winds. That's the normal situation. But what happened in this particular event, which was advertised as going to be the strongest since 2011, and I would say in the case of Pasadena, it was about as strong as 2011. I think it was stronger in our particular area, is that the jet stream, the high level elevation wind, also had curved around, and you had 150 mile an hour winds up at 30,000 feet that were going straight down the same path from north to south or north northeast to south southwest that were supporting that same sort of lower elevation pressure gradient. So you had a normal Santa Ana that was amplified dramatically by this upper level support of the jet stream on top. And that's why instead of 30 or 40 mile an hour winds, we were seeing 70 mile an hour sustained in the afternoon of the 7th and 100 mile an hour gusts up on the ridge lines.
So that's basically hurricane force. I mean, once you get past 74 miles an hour, you're basically talking about a hurricane. So the winds were incredibly strong, and yet there had been a fire 6 days before on New Year's Eve or into New Year's Day that did not spread. And you've talked about that as a possible origin for this fire. I would just preface your response by saying I also noticed that fire because I came out of my house on New Year's Day and I smelled the smoke, and I looked around trying to see where it was coming from because I knew immediately that was a brush fire smell, and I couldn't see it, and it was a calm day. So my family and I went hiking in the forest like nothing had happened, and we went down to the beach. We had a great New Year's Day. Now all those pictures and videos look rather haunting because it was the last time we would do that. But the smell of smoke did waft down from the highlands to the Marquez Knolls, which is further down the hillside. So tell us a little bit about that fire.
Okay, so that fire really began probably shortly after midnight, right? And, we were all celebrating New Year's. We were watching it in our bed, and the ball drop with our kids in our bedroom at midnight, and then went to bed shortly afterwards. But before we were falling asleep, we heard fireworks going off, and I don't know how close those fireworks were, right? Where I live in Los Angeles, fireworks are all over the place on New Year's Eve, right? It's every place in LA goes off with the fireworks. But it did seem like they were kind of close, and I think there's a lot of other people in the neighborhood that heard fireworks. So we looked up at we looked up out of our window, and nothing was happening. Went to sleep. About an hour later, we started to hear helicopters overhead coming and giving a water drop that was really right on what you're sharing there is the hidden little Buddha. That is, if you look on Google Maps, that's a little spot right at the top of the connector between the enclave trailhead that goes up to Temescal Ridge. That is where it connects, and just to the right, if you're going up the hill, there's this little outcrop that's called Hidden Little Buddha on the Google Maps. So that appears to be the site of the initiation of the July 1st fire, and a lot of people like to hang out there. I don't know what they're doing up there.
January 1st.
Yeah, the January fire.
For those who are watching this on YouTube instead of listening, what we've done is pulled up a map, or not a map really, it's a photograph. I took this photograph in late January from a spot called Top of the World. If you've hiked to the top of Lockman, there's a little trail through the state park. Some people sneak up the direct route, but you can get there going the roundabout way through the fire road and then up the state park trail. And I took this photograph looking toward the origin point of the fire. So what Andrew has done is he's put some notes on that photograph, and the red circle shows the initial smoke from January 7th, but the orange area, which is wider, is labeled approximate January 1st, 2025 burn area. So that was about an 8-acre fire caused, we believe, by fireworks, right, Andrew? That was fireworks on midnight or after.
It happened. It started 10 minutes after midnight, and fireworks were heard what else could it be, right?
Right. And we have a problem with fireworks in the neighborhood. I mean, last July, I chased some kids at 2 a.m. who set off fireworks outside my house. And it happens almost every year that people do it. I don't know why they choose our intersection in particular. Maybe it's the American flags on several homes, but people set off fireworks there, and I chased some teenagers and told them that what they were doing was dangerous, and it is dangerous. But fireworks, New Year's Day, the fire department came and they put out that fire, and then the January 7th fire started from a similar point. Now, you had been concerned as a neighbor, and there you see in the image there the neighborhood of the Highlands off to the left, and you had been able to access that area before the massive Palisades fire, but you had gone up to see the burn scar for several days, right? When you went mountain biking or hiking, you were able to actually examine the burn scar.
Actually, I went skiing like the next day, actually. So I missed a few days of that, but I did go up to the burn scar the day of basically because like I knew there was going to be a huge wind event, and I like to mountain bike, and I like to like try to beat other people on some the rankings of how fast you can go over some particular segment of space. And I figured with a huge tailwind that day I'd be able to win. Be able to get the fastest time down Temescal Ridge, right? And so I went up there and like ripped down it, didn't quite get it, and I figured, okay, well we'll go check out that burn scar while we're at it, right? And sort of looked around at that, and that was around 9 a.m. on the 7th.
So 9 a.m. on the 7th, you're at the burn scar. The fire starts approximately 90 minutes later at 10:29 a.m. But did you smell smoke?
Fire started at 25. We already had photos at 10:27.
Wow. Okay. So fire starts 10:25. Photos were taken 10:27. Did you smell smoke at 9 a.m?
I did not smell smoke at 9 a.m. Because, and I think maybe it was because the wind was coming from the north, right? So I went up the trailhead and I went sort of up Temescal Ridge, came back down, stood at the Hidden Little Buddha area, which I think is the origin. And we don't know exactly what the origin is on the January 1st fire. We don't know exactly what the origin was on the 7th, right? But what we do know is that on that particular day, the wind was blowing from where I was standing sort of south. But I would say that there were multiple people in the Highlands that did report some smell of smoke, even at 8 a.m. that day. And I think the general consensus of the neighbors was that was the first day that we'd had wind blowing from the north to the south. So that might have been the first time that we were actually smelling the burnt material in a strong way from the fire.
That was the first time it blew toward the homes.
Because it was actually blowing, the wind was finally blowing. Because, if you walk around a fresh burn scar, like it smells pretty smoky, or it smells pretty, right. You've got that burn scent. And so that was the sort of, I'd say, the general consensus of neighbors at the time.
Okay, so let's play a few videos. This, I think, is the first video we have from your visit to the burn scar and what you saw there. Let's see if we can pull that up, Oren. So do you want to describe what's going on here?
Right, so this is standing on the top of Hidden Little Buddha looking along Temescal Ridge. So that's the Temescal Ridge Trail right there. And
we can play it again.
Yeah, so we're sort of sweeping, looking over the enclave in the Highlands, sweeping sort of towards the south now. If you look very carefully there, you can even see the wind blow a little puff of dust off the ground. You won't be able to see that stream, but it looks like there's nothing obvious. There's clearly nothing obviously burning there at the time. But you could, that sort of gives you a nice sort of visual perspective of what the burn scar looked like very shortly before the fire. And I would say that this is not the total extent of it, though, because if we look over at that little rise to the left, it seems like, based on the mapping of satellite maps that we've seen, the Sentinel-2 satellite map, that the fire origin was near the ridge line, Keep going a little bit. As we pan back, pause it as soon as it pans back to the actual ridgeline. Do that peak, right?
Let's try again.
Maybe on the way over to it, we can see it. But anyway,
Yeah.
there's a little peak in the background that's burned on one side. And I think just beyond that peak is the most likely origin point based on smoke showing at 10:45 on the satellite maps.
All right, we'll get a couple other angles of it, including the later photograph after the fire. Oren, do you want to play Burn Scar 2? This is a very short film. This is an enhanced close-up of what you were talking about. It's very, very quick, but if you can see...
There we go. Yeah, you can see. And this one, you can just...
Wow, there it is. I know you can see right there.
You can see a little bit of dust that comes off the ground. And so
you're sure that's dust and not smoke? Could it be smoke? That little whiff of white
I thought,
dust?
when I first took it, first of all, I didn't see it at all when I first took it. And then after, thinking back, I was like, well, I have all this footage. Let me look through this footage, right? And see. And then I was like, oh, this little thing's blowing off the ground. But that actual point does not map well to where the smoke column was at 10:45.
Okay, so let's see that one. Let's see one of the early videos of the fire starting. Let's do first fire 1 there. Okay, so this is from your home.
Right, that's from my home. I can probably show, but this is this is actually after the fire is pretty well established. I think the most, if I can share my screen, I would love to show you a screenshot from, I think, probably the best reported story, which was by Brianna Sachs, and who's a local actually, and Joyce Lee at the Washington Post. And so they had a really well reported story, I thought. And one of the things that they discovered was that by happenstance, there's Sentinel-2 satellite had passed over the Palisades at 10:45 a.m. And in that satellite pass, you can see basically in this sort of boxed area, this rectangled area was what the roughly burn scar of New Year's Eve fire. And then you can see the smoke column moving southward. So in the video that you just showed, you can see at the bottom of that smoke column is basically what you were seeing at the bottom end of it is what you're seeing from the video from my backyard. But what we need to think about is what is the origin of that smoke, right? Where is that? And that is just sort of to the southeast of that rise that was in my video. And if we scroll up to here, right, this is where they have the burn scar. You can see the map there. This is where they've sort of pulled it in on January 5th. And then we scroll down here and you can see it looks like the smoke column is originating. And remember, the wind is blowing strong from the northeast. So it's going to be pushing the fire south. And it's going to be very hard for the fire to creep north, although eventually it did. So that first sort of smoke area is probably very close to the origination point because this satellite photo was 20 minutes after the ignition. So it looks like somewhere along Temescal Ridge, along the edge of the burn scar.
Very interesting. And let's take a look at one of the other videos that you took of the first time. What time was that?
That was 56. I think that was the 1056 is the first chopper that I saw coming over the backyard. That looks like a scout chopper, but I mean, by that time, it was already pretty well established, and the wind situation was.
So 10:56.
So it's 30 minutes after the fire basically started.
That's the first video I have of it. I don't know when the actual first chopper was up, but
I think the New York Times reported that it took 44 minutes for the first engine to arrive. So the first vehicle to arrive at the top of whatever road they were able to use was 44 minutes later. And they said something like it took 20 minutes to get any kind of helicopter in the air to get a visual picture of the fire. So what you were seeing might not have been the first time they were above it in some place, but that's roughly the right time frame, 20, 30 minutes afterward.
Yeah.
Not really great, right? Way too long.
I mean, you're not it's too late, man. You've got winds that are going to be 70 mile per hour. Like, there's one thing we've learned about, these fires that hit that level of wind in Santa Rosa or Gatlinburg. Once it's established, it's going to be very difficult to stop.
So they really had to intervene early if they were going to stop it at all.
Yeah.
Let's just quickly go to a couple of the photographs that I took and one of the videos that I took. Oren, do you want to put up the other photograph, the one with just the red circle? And we'll see that. This is basically, again, same time, late January as the original photograph, the annotated photograph that I showed earlier, taken from top of the world. And I circled a portion of the ridgeline in red because what I saw in the distance were two vehicles. So I believed at the time that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the ATF, had gone up there and they were actively investigating. Oh yes, you're zooming in. You can see those are vehicles. Those aren't trees or anything. There are trees up there, but badly burned, of course. But then you see these two vehicles. Somebody is up there doing something. And I had seen the ATF down by the Malibu Incident Fire Command. They had their mobile command post. And the ATF investigator was coming in and out. I never actually happened to be there when he was there, but people told me they had seen him because I was trying to get in touch with them. I have since been in touch with the ATF, and they've been very good about returning my phone calls, but every time they return my phone calls, they say, we have nothing new, we're still investigating, and there's going to be some report at some point, but 3 months later, we don't know. It's not like the Eaton fire over in Altadena, Pasadena, where there are videos of power lines sparking, and there's already a lawsuit by LA County against SoCal Edison. They're blaming them for the fire. Here, it's still an open question. And Andrew, I've been going with the theory of the burn scar reigniting, but there could be other causes, right? I mean, maybe low probability attached to those causes, but other things could have happened.
Yeah, I mean, we can break it down into, I think, a couple of different possibilities, right? There's human origin, there's power line origin, and there's reignition. Okay, and in the human origin, we can break it into accidental, right? Or we could break it into arson. And the Palisades is no stranger to arson, right? The 2021 Palisades Fire, I believe, that burned out all the Santa Ynez sort of valley there was, I believe, arson. And also the fire maybe 2 years before that along Palisades Drive that came up and hit in the homes on Vista Grandes. That also, I believe, was arson. In this case, right, like, we haven't seen any conclusive evidence that there was someone up on Temesco Ridge at that specific location at that time. There might have been, there might not have been, we don't know. Maybe the ATF knows. They have much more information. They have much more ability to access cell phone pings, right, to triangulate that. There is the social media posts of those kids that were at Skull Rock. In my opinion, if they never got above Skull Rock, it wasn't them, right? Because the fire origination point is further north. But we don't know, right? We don't know.
So that story is interesting. My friend Patrick Corelchi, who runs the Red Pilled America podcast, he is, I think, pursuing that theory that these guys who were up there at Skull Rock, who just happened to be near the origin of the fire and just happened to be running away from it, might have some explaining to do. That's basically his position. Oh, that's great to put that map back up. So you see Skull Rock all the way on the right, and it's far away from the origin point of the fire. So that's the point, Andrew, I think you're making, is that they might have been hiking around Skull Rock, but that was not where the fire looked to have started. But they've been tripped up.
Was Skull Rock and below, and they said that's where they stopped. I don't, who knows?
Who knows, right? But they've been, in a sense, done in. That sounds too final or too accusatory, but one of the problems is that one of the explanations they've given as to why they couldn't have started the fire is that they don't smoke, and apparently there's some social media evidence that one of them does. I don't know. There are all kinds of explanations. I have found hikers smoking on some of these trails, and I've told them to stop because I said literally the whole town will go up if you do that. And unfortunately, that happened, although we don't know it was because of people smoking, right? We're still going with the fireworks theory. I think is the most likely one. But there were other arrests later on in the course of the fire, people elsewhere in LA were arrested for arson, and that's why some people thought maybe this one was also caused by arson.
Yeah, I mean, so it's still, I think, a possibility, and I think we're going to have to wait to see what the ATF reports. I think they have access to way more information, non-public information, right? I think cell phone pings are probably the best chance, although I don't know how well you can triangulate along Temescal Ridge based on, the kind of lack of cell phone coverage in the Palisades in general.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
we also have this sort of the theory that the power lines over here between Green Peak and the Highlands were the proximal cause of that. And it was reported early on that those were de-energized. I think a day or two ago, we just saw a lawsuit that was filed that
Right.
says that they were energized and that they may have caused a secondary ignition later on that evening, which is a sort of interesting theory. And, I don't really know, what to say about that. But, the most consistent theory with the evidence, I think the simplest explanation is probably a relight of something hidden under the dirt. I'm sure the fire fighters, checked it as well as they could and looked to make sure that it was out. But
Yeah, I talked to firefighters who told me they couldn't be sure it was out. All they can do is check the soil, dig a little bit, but apparently fire can continue smoldering in the roots of plants for 2 weeks. Or thereabouts.
Yeah, and that video I shot of the top, I don't think it shows any smoke. I do think it shows like that you can see dust coming off the ground. So the wind was sufficient to excavate the surface of the soil.
Right.
And if you keep doing that over time, and the wind, that was 9 o'clock. The wind was not forecast to get strong until 10. So as that sort of wind continues to increase, you can imagine oxygen getting into areas where oxygen wasn't normally there a few days ago.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating, and also the dynamic movement of the winds over the course of the fire. So we've seen footage just now of the smoke spreading from north to south, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically that means traveling from the mountain and the ridgeline toward the ocean. But then a day or two later, the wind reversed course and the fire started traveling eastward toward Mandeville Canyon and the 405. And that's where they eventually did stop it. By then, the winds weren't as strong anymore, and they could get some aerial assets up, and they were able to put it out. But I'm going to show one more video, and then I know Oren and Ron will have some questions. But Oren, can you show my video? This is a video I shot the same day I took the photographs from Top of the World. This just gives you a kind of panoramic view of the area, similar to what Andrew shot, although from a different peak. But this, of course, is after the fire. That's from Top of the World. And we call it Top of the World because when the fog rolls in, it really does feel like you're on top of the world. And you can look out in certain directions and feel like you're standing above the clouds. You might as well be 30,000 feet high. But anyway, it's a spectacularly beautiful landscape now, unfortunately, completely scarred by this fire. But we're still trying to get to the bottom of it. And Oren and Ron, I don't know if you guys have any questions or thoughts about it, but that's, I think, a pretty good summary of what we know.
I don't have a scientific, lens to look at this with because this is not my expertise. I do know that on the day of the fires, we were in Sunset Mesa, which is right across. So we really did see it starting right at the beginning. And, I've been living there for 15 years. We're no strangers to evacuations and fires and scares, and I've seen it all. But what I remember, and I still hold on to, is the fire seemed to be starting at an unusual time, with unusual vigor, and in a place where it wouldn't occur to me that it would start without some human intervention, whether premeditated or by accident or not. Now, I'm not an expert in like fires reigniting. I know that it happens, But I just remember that I'm still holding on to it. The whole time, something doesn't sit right with me with how that fire started. The time of day was unusual for how they usually start. The whole thing was seemed to me like very sudden, very fast, very rapid acceleration. And I don't know if there's any tests or anything like that they've done on whether there was any accelerant found in the area or anything like that. But that's the only thing I don't really have a question. It's just more of like my general feeling. And I've been carrying it around since then, is like that. To me, it felt, again, just a feeling, being very close to it, that it felt unusual for the pattern, from pattern recognition standpoint, that I've seen over the last 15 years living in our area.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say that the pattern recognition. Okay, so let me play the other side of that, right? The pattern recognition that you have over the last 15 years, this data is outside of the sample set. It's outside of the training set, right? This is I'm not going to say unprecedented, but certainly only once in the last 15 years did it happen anywhere in LA, and I think here it was even worse. So let me show you a little video, actually. So the best video I think that we have of the origin of the fire is UCSD has a network of fire sensors and fire cameras that are around, and this video is going to show you the initiation of the fire from 10:25 to 10:40. Okay, and let me see if I can share that screen here, and I've got it going on a loop. Okay, you see that? Okay, so there's the initiation at 10:25, and the accelerant is called oxygen, and wind that's blowing 30, 40 miles an hour at that point. You can see how fast that smoke is coming off that, and how directional that smoke is. So, I don't know. I think an accelerant.
It certainly was like very unusual windy conditions that day. Mm-hmm. But I remember, and everybody was on guard about it. I remember talking to my neighbor around 9:30, 10. Like we were worried that day about something happening. However, just the sheer force of it was just so fast and rapid that it right away, just looking at the first puffs of smoke, we're like, oh shit, this is serious. It was bigger than anything I've seen in that area. Yeah. Now, take what I said earlier, and then looking at the rest of that week and seeing in all the other fires that started in LA in pretty strategic locations, I would say, Eden Fire, the Pasadena, Hearst, all I'm saying is, for me, and I'm not trying to play conspiracy theorist at all. I want to believe the science, and I do believe it. Something to me about that day and that week seemed like there was some hand driving some of the fires because of the sheer location, magnitude, size, strategy, all of it. There were some people that were arrested. I don't know if they had anything to do with other fires. I just feel, it's a game of percentages, as you said. We can't rule out anything. We can't, we can't have any other information yet because they haven't released anything, which I think is, overdue. And I think the more that they withhold the results of the investigation, the more people suspicious are, because if it was something as simple as, okay, reignition or I also don't buy that. I know there's cell phone data. We can target, individuals in foreign countries with pinpoint accuracy. I'm sure there's like 1 million satellites on this spot, even though it's deserted, that we can get access to if the government agencies wanted. So I don't know. I want to get this report out of the way, and I don't know why haven't they released it yet.
I mean, I think the last major fire report, the Lahaina fire report, took a year before it came out. And I do agree with you that the origin of these fires were in almost the worst possible location, right? Absolutely. Right. Like my worst case scenario was, which I, sent out to our little neighborhood WhatsApp the night before, if pack your bags tonight because if a fire starts in Encino, it'll be here in an hour. I didn't think it was going to be actually starting in our freaking neighborhood, like a quarter mile from our house.
Right.
It's like origin is the most vulnerable position for the Palisades, period. I agree with that.
And just like I've been thinking about this over the years, and you tell me if this is true or not, because this has been my theory. You know, if you wanted to start a fire, if you were strategic about it, if you did, for whatever reason, anarchist, I don't care, whatever the reason is, you could get like not a big group of people, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 people, and strategically light the whole city on fire. I think that is very possible, and I think like
This is the location you would choose.
and these are the locations that you would choose. Am I like that's what is kind of gnawing at me for the last few months. Is that, would you say that's accurate, or is that like just me thinking crazy?
I mean, absolutely. It would be the day and the time that you would do it right at the beginning of the onset of the strong winds, and it really is in the most vulnerable positions, both here and in the Eaton fire. But also you have to consider what is your prior data set here. What is the existing conditions on the ground, and multiply the probability that those existing conditions on the ground would have resulted in this outcome, and consider that against the other existing conditions, which is the odds of there being a cabal of arsonists that are going around, right? And then you find what the joint probability is. And
is it a cabal though? Is like, or do you need like 3, 4 crazy people?
I don't know. 2 or 3 people is probably enough.
Yeah, that's my point. And like, do you like? There's no shortage of crazy people that have no shortage of crazy causes. So
a lot of ring cameras up there, dude. I mean,
Yeah.
I would think it would be very difficult for those people to have escaped that area without being on footage from the dozens or even hundreds of people that submitted their rings and stuff to the ATF. So I think we'll find out. I mean,
we'll find
I don't
out.
know if we'll know. I don't know. I think there will always be a doubt as to what is the true origin, and I think arson is still a possibility. Carelessness is still a possibility, and reignition is a possibility.
What percentage would you assign those? Let's.
I don't want to. I would think that.
Okay, give me. I'm like,
number on it, man. What percentage would you assign those? Tell me your number. I'll tell you my number.
I'd say 80% likely that it's a reignition from the fireworks. And I tend to favor accidental causes because I think people are careless. And I've dealt with the fireworks problem before and the smokers. So I would say like 10% somebody smoking on the trail. Maybe, I don't want to speculate as to who was doing it. But, 10% someone enjoying a joint where they shouldn't have been. And then 10% someone actually setting fire to stuff. I mean, Andrew, as you said, there have been arson cases in previous fires, 2021 and maybe 2019. We actually bought our house in 2019 and couldn't move in. We couldn't actually close because of the fire that began during our escrow period, and our house was within the evacuation warning zone. So we couldn't get fire insurance, and so we couldn't actually close on the house until the fire incident was over. So we moved into the Palisades knowing the fire was a risk. We did get fire insurance. We were lucky to keep our fire insurance. But as a result, for every year that we've been there, since we arrived, we've been hyper vigilant about fire, which is why I called the LADWP when the grass got too high on their property next to my home and said, you have to cut this because it's a fire hazard. And whatever else you can say about the LADWP, and there may be a lot to say with the empty reservoir and the lines that were live or might not have been live, they did come and cut the grass, and they turned that from a fire hazard into a fire break, and they probably are responsible for saving half of the homes on my street, because when we've looked at it, every house that was up against that LADWP lot survived, and I think it's because they cleared that brush. It's one of the reasons, but there are a whole other set of problems we've been talking about on podcasts. If your house is still standing, it's not exactly an easy situation. It's good, but it's not great. But we knew it was a fire hazard. we knew that we were exposed to that risk. We didn't think it was this extreme. And, I haven't ruled out the idea that someone could have done something on purpose. I have friends who are convinced that it must have been on purpose, because why was the mayor out of town conveniently? And why were the fire engines conveniently not where they ought to have been? So you start to add up different elements of this, and it starts to look like the perfect crime, because how can all of these things happen? Yeah, the wind, okay, the jet stream, and that we can't control, but they told the firefighters to go home the day before, and the police were mysteriously unavailable.
Engine 23 was at Ciela at 8 a.m. responding.
Yeah, say something about that. Yeah.
To a car accident. A single car accident, had run into some post at Ciela, and they were there. I dropped my kid off for the bus pickup. I was like, oh well, at least there's a fire truck up here, But my understanding is that fire truck went down the hill after responding to that, instead of up the hill to, take a look at that risky burn zone. And I know that the reporter that did that Washington Post article was following up and doing Freedom of Information Act requests on that radio chatter that led to that decision, but I don't know the outcome of that. And I'm surprised they haven't released another follow-up story to the article, and maybe they never will now that it's 3 months later.
I've talked to some of the firefighters, including at both Station 69 in the center of town and Station 23, which is in Marquez Knolls.
Mm-hmm.
And the firefighters are completely shell-shocked. I mean, at 69, they were just so frustrated, and they were vocal about it. At 23, they were also frustrated, but they didn't want to say anything, almost like it was too painful for them to talk about it. And the one firefighter I spoke to said that the big problem that they had struggled with over the years was the failure to clear brush. When private landowners wanted to clear brush, they couldn't get permission somehow from the Santa Monica Mountains Conservatory to do it, or to clear, maybe it was clearing brush on state land adjacent to the private property, but the brush clearance, they said, had been a major issue. And there are reporters now in the Palisades trying to get to the bottom of that issue. And I know that because not too long ago, in the last several days, there was a reporter from one of the major news outlets who was looking at the problem of brush on privately owned land that he seemed to think had accelerated the fire and maybe could have made it worse if private landowners had maybe been required to clear brush. And they are. But
they are. I mean, it wasn't I was fined like 5 years ago.
Oh, you were?
I don't know. I've definitely cleared now. You only make that mistake once. I missed the.
You missed the letter? They communicate by letter. You have to snail mail. Yeah.
I want to share a video. We talked about like a lot, like where the fire started, and I think there were a lot of issues. First of all is where the fire started, what caused it. Yes, that's the one thing, because nobody cleared the brush around it. The second thing is that we didn't have water, right? I think that one of the main thing, and I'm going to show a video from my camera at home at like this is at 4:13 in the afternoon. That's where the fire started, like burning our house. And I want to show you that like two things. First of all, the electricity was still on and the gas was on. And my house, actually, my neighbor, his son is a firefighter, trained firefighter, and he stayed to save the houses around. And he almost like was able to save like probably his house, maybe our house. And he said that at a certain point, our house didn't got on fire. It just blew in the air, like from probably from gas. And I want to show you this video. I hope I can share it like this because I didn't prepare it in advance, but let's see if it will work. Okay. So yeah, it's playing. Great. Now, at second 20, you see where the fire is over here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we can hear the sound, but in a second you'll see it. Okay. You see this? Can you hear the sound?
We can't hear the sound, but basically what we're seeing is a small fire what looks like a small fire flickering through the doorway, and then it just flares at second 20, basically.
Yeah, when the sound, when you can hear the sound, you can hear that it's like there is a sound of gas coming out. So gas is coming out. Now, when you hear the sound, you also hear that there is like fire trucks out there right now, and they're reversing. You can hear them like reversing with like the beep beep beep. There is fire truck over there right now at this moment. The house over here is burning down. This is like open gas line. Obviously, I have electricity because this is at like 4:13. I think the electricity went down probably like 10 minutes later or something like this. But obviously, the electricity is on, the gas is on, and there is like a fire truck outside my house. And that's at 4:13. So even if like we didn't clear the brush, and even if we didn't have water, like the fact that the gas was on, I'm sure that that's not only my house. I'm sure that there is like other houses. And for me, I don't know, it like, and again, maybe we should ask and like do some research about it. I never did, but like it makes sense that you can close the gas to a neighborhood like Sunset Mesa. There is 400 houses there, like everything is underground. The electricity is underground. I know that like over here, I'm now in Point Doom. In Point Doom, their gas was down, their electricity was down. And over here, the whole neighborhood is on fire. Electricity is on, gas is on. So I think that there is like, I don't think there is one thing that we can put our point on and say, oh, you know what? That's because there was no water, or that's because there was no like firefighters. I think it's like a comedy of mistakes. Unfortunately, it's not a comedy. It's like a very sad drama of mistakes.
And for those who live in our neighborhood, they know like we have power shutoffs like all the time, like multiple times a year. You know, and I don't know if it would have helped. It probably wouldn't have, but not to have it that day, doesn't make sense. So again, like Oren just saying like the same things that everybody repeats in their head, which is like there are just like multiple errors, unforced errors in many cases, and it doesn't compute. Like, why would you shut off the power like, you know, several times in the past year, and then on the day that you have that and you have the fires going on for hours and hours and hours, you don't shut off the power?
You mean like when they shut off the power because high winds are coming and they're afraid of the sparks?
And they warned us the day before they're going to shut it off, and they usually do shut it off. Except that day they didn't shut it off. I have power. I have videos of my house going up in flames because they didn't shut it off at all.
You know, it's interesting. There were some power outages. We lost power in our neighborhood at some point, and what happened was some of the pumps apparently that bring water to the tanks. Now the reservoir was empty, but there are these 3 million gallon tanks elsewhere in the Palisades, and apparently those pumps stopped working because they lost power. So maybe they were keeping the power on to keep the pumps going. I have no idea, but it does seem like there were different conditions in different places. Some people had no water pressure. There were parts of our neighborhood that did have water, not where I was, but literally half a mile down the hill. On the second day of the fire on January 8th, I saw firefighters with full water pressure putting out a fire by the lake shrine. The lake shrine survived, by the way, because they had a floating barge on the lake with a pump that they were using to get the water out of the lake and into a hose that was being used to hose down the perimeter of the lake shrine. They only lost one tree. Several buildings around the shrine burnt down, but that's how they did it.
You know what, Joel? Let me ask you this. You know, if you live in Malibu and you want to change your window in your house, you know how long you need to spend in planning department? Around 3 to 6 months you need to spend in planning department. I'm thinking of what you just said, and I'm like, okay, nobody planned that there is like a dedicated line for these water pumps, or there is a dedicated line, a shut-off valve for this gas pump. I have a factory, right? In my factory, you have to have a shut-off electricity for every machine. you have to have a shut off for the water at every point. Like, you know how long it takes to get permit to move one point of water from like here to like 10 feet over there, or to get like, if I want to add another machine, to add another line of electricity, you know how long it takes like to get a permit? And we're talking about like planning department of like a city that nobody planned. Nobody did the planning. Like, and honestly, I don't think you need to be a genius to think about it, that there is a fire. If there is a fire, we need to be able to really quickly shut down the electricity and shut down the gas, but make sure that like the pump is still working. So I don't know, like they're putting a lot of people in planning department to make sure that I didn't move my window and like make it instead of 60 inches, 61 inches, God forbid. But nobody's there in planning department to make sure, you know, that like there will be like pumps working if there is a fire.
Yeah.
Malibu needs to introduce a wind shut-off switch.
Yeah. Well, you know, the point about the gas is interesting because the fires burned really, really hot at these homes, which is why so many metals melted. And I wonder how much of the heat was driven by gas fires. Now, apparently, there's some provision in the mayor's emergency order that says you'll get your permits to rebuild more quickly if you go all electric. I don't know if that's because of fire prevention or kind of climate change thing.
I believe that's due to health concerns about natural gas.
Oh, the stoves and the asthma and all that stuff.
There's been research that shows that's kind of bad. But
yeah, we probably don't.
So, you know, whatever the fuel source is, remember that what that fuel needs to burn is oxygen. Okay, the more that you apply oxygen, like when we send up a rocket into space, right? One of the tanks is pure oxygen. The other thing can be whatever you want, hydrogen, methane, you know, whatever. But you have to have the oxygen. And if you are pumping in oxygen at 5 or 10 times the rate, any blast furnace, okay, you're just pumping in oxygen. That is what allows you to reach the much higher levels of temperature, because it's just the rate of oxidation that can take place. Certain fuels will oxidize faster or whatnot, but you have to have that the oxygen is the key fuel source.
I think I'm like, you know, I know why they're taking their time on the decision, because it's a very, very important report that they're going to release. It's worth hundreds of billions of dollars in potential litigation and potential finger pointing and all of it. So they should take their time. There's also the possibility that they won't find anything conclusive. I don't know if I told you guys this, but this is actually the second time I lost my house to a fire. The first time I lost my house was my first house, which I bought, which was in Toronto, Canada. And you know, it burnt to the ground along with like several other houses. And the fire marshal did this big investigation, and it took 6 months. And at the end of it, they said, we don't know what happened. And that was it, right? Can't go in there. We don't know. And that was it. And that may be the result of this too.
They have to have, I mean, there's too much on the line, right? There's too much.
But there's too much on the line, and I don't know how they.
Maybe there's too much on the line, and they can't actually come up with the answer.
Well, the odd thing is that if you have a situation like the Woolsey fire or the Eaton fire, where there's a power company involved, then there's some hope for residents to sue, either in a class action or a mass tort, and actually get some money back. Even though I think with Pacific Gas and Electric in Northern California, they actually had to declare bankruptcy at some point because of all these lawsuits. But the problem is, what if you find out that it's some random person who flicked a cigarette butt into the brush, and that person is homeless or, you know, a student or something? They're completely judgment-proof because they don't have anything to sue for. So the ATF can come out and say, well, we've identified this suspect, and you know they're going to go to jail for 20 years or however many years it is, but it doesn't help the residents sue or be made whole. And then you've got to go to the federal government for the money because LA doesn't have the money. LADWP doesn't really have the money. I know people are suing LADWP, but I don't think the pockets are that deep over there, relatively speaking, to what the scale of the damage is. So, I mean, in a way, the worst case scenario is to find that it was some individual who through negligence did this, because what do you do? So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of money at stake, but
I agree.
yeah.
By the
So
way,
question- yeah, go ahead.
Oren, I just want to say, Oren, you don't get scot-free telling us your percentage odds of what you think it's, if you think it's arson or not arson. We're gonna handicap this thing, make it a fun betting line.
Listen, I think it's like negligence of like many years that somebody, maybe it's an arson, maybe it's not, you know, I have no way to know. But what concerned me more than than who started it is like who put us in a situation that somebody can just come with like a joint and throw it and burn down a whole city. That's I think the more interesting question. Who put us in this situation that we're like
So vulnerable.
nobody can help us. We're paying so much money for taxes. We didn't get no like fire department. Our electricity was on. Our gas was on. Nobody could help us. And like if you want to continue with this, like look now, like let's go. We didn't mention the word debris until now, right? So let's go into debris removal. Nobody is helping us like figuring out what we need to do. Now, second stage is going to be permits, right? I hear a lot of like, you know, very like everybody saying, oh, you're going to get your permits in 30 days, in 45 days. Well, okay, I want to see it. I want to see. I want to see like how it's starting to get built. In our neighborhood, Ron, you know that we're having now a lot of issues with the HOA. That I don't know how we're going to start building over there. So I see the same pattern. The same pattern that led us to this is what like taking it out from this, and that's what more concerning to me than who threw the joint over there, or if it was like electrical cable. So what? There is an electrical cable. Electrical cable can be like tear down and like start a fire. But if you understand that we live in Southern California, that everything is dry, that you need to clear the brush, because you need to clear the brush, because if not, you're going to burn down 10,000 houses.
Yeah.
So all of these things are the things that concern me more.
When I look at my video cameras in my house and I see it until the last second, like really everything going down, is I realize that unless we take a collective group effort in the rebuild, it's going to happen again. Because my house was fairly recently renovated, remodeled. It was stucco. It was like, you know, relative to the neighborhood, fairly fireproof. But the houses all around me weren't. There were wooden decks. There's all, you know, all this trees, fires, brush, you know, just all around. And any one of those things would have tripped the fire anyways in my house. And there's nothing that I could have done. It doesn't matter what the house would have been made of. So my takeaway is like when we rebuild, we got to rebuild smarter, like as a collective, because even one weak link can expose all of us. So
Yeah.
that, you know, and I think that's the thing that insurance companies are going to look at too, obviously.
There's one thing that sorry, Andrew, just one point I wanted to make because we haven't mentioned it yet, which is the possibility of homeless people igniting a fire. That was actually my first suspicion on the day of, because it had happened before. And every time you drive through Sepulveda Pass on the 405, you know, now those hills look green, but a few years ago they were all on fire. And I think that fire was started by a cooking fire from a homeless encampment. And it turns out there were 15 homeless people living in Pacific Palisades in those hills. One in town, a guy, I think his name was Eric. I actually spoke to him. He was the guy who used to stand at the top of Temescal and play his guitar with his funny signs. But there were 15 people actually living in the mountains. I saw a couple of them when I was hiking, and there was one guy I actually recognized because I would see him over and over again. And, you know, I'm not trying to blame them or anything, but it was the first thought that crossed my mind that perhaps somebody had lit a fire because it was a cold night or something and wasn't on social media and wasn't getting the weather warnings and woke up to find that their overnight fire had become an inferno. I mean, it's possible. No idea. But the homeless problem in LA with the encampments and all the hazards that they bring, that's something else we have to deal with, Ron. I mean, I think we have to...
Well, at least we have some funds to pay for it then.
Yeah.
I think like $9 billion. and another 0.25% hike today that everybody's paying.
Yeah, the new tax, the sales tax.
Yes, that went into effect today.
Sorry, Andrew, I cut you off. You were going to say something.
Yeah, well, first I would say, yeah, we have many of the previous fires in the Palisades were started by the homeless. I just don't see how that could possibly be the proximal cause of this particular fire. And then speaking to Ron's point and Oren's point, like it is a collective effort, and you have to have, and it's all probabilities, right? This fire happened at the highest risk possible time, right? So that will put us in a particularly vulnerable position with, this other sort of prior fire that could potentially have been an ignition source. So we need to think in terms of layers of protection, right? And there's no single thing that you can do. You can put the grills on your vents, right, to prevent embers from coming in. You can seal the eaves. You can do stucco. You can shift the tiling on your roof. You can create a defensible space. Each one of them gives you, an extra percentage of protection. But until we all collectively do that, it's almost like herd immunity with vaccines or something, right? If everybody does it to a particular level, then we can be protected. But if we don't, then we're going to see recurrence of these events, and it's going to be a challenge of collective effort to really solve fires, to put it in a position where we actually feel like we have control over the environment, rather than the environment sometimes showing us that it actually is the boss.
Yeah, in every way, it has to be a collective success. I mean, where we are in the Marquez Knolls, my home is one of the only ones standing, and it has a theoretical value, but essentially it has no value because there's no community around it. So my house is not livable until my neighbors have homes again. Just, you can't raise kids in ruins. So we have to get everybody up on their feet, and that's what we're trying to do. It's very hard, as Oren points out. I mean, so many promises, so many obstacles. It's very tough. It's tough. And someone was saying today, I can't remember who, but I think maybe it was Jeremy. Ron, our last guest on our last podcast said that the challenge is the optimism, to keep the optimism going, and the leadership and the momentum. And that's part of why we're doing this podcast, is to keep the conversation going and to keep that momentum, even when we come on here and complain. We want to keep the connection going.
Yeah, I don't think it's complaining. I think it's more like just voicing our directional, concern that when things are not going as they should. And again, what I would love to see is some kind of like innovation, some people coming up with like great new plans. Like, even if it's just a topic for conversation, people send me stuff, all the time on Instagram about like, this new firefighting technology, like drones flying over the air, like, and, like Iron Dome for fires. Like, like I get one of these, like, twice a week. And like, I'm saying most of these are probably BS,
raising funds,
but like most of them are BS, but I would love for somebody, like anybody in government, to say, you know what, like, let's think about that, rather than talking about, the same way that things have been done for 50 years. And building the same way that it was in 1964.
Well, I've been thinking about that. There are urban planners. Everybody knows how to do it right? This happens in Australia. Like, people understand how to do it. It's just being able to implement that and having the political will. And we might not want to do that. It might make our houses and our yards look ugly, right? Like,
right.
We're in an urban wildlife interface. It's a very challenging situation 1% or 0.1% of the time of the year, right? Mm-hmm. But in that time, it can be absolutely explosive and disastrous. And I don't know. And to get the political will to plan for the black swan when you haven't seen the black swan is almost impossible, as you probably know.
Right. Well,
yeah. Very, very difficult. Well, Andrew Hires, it's been incredible having you on the podcast, and tell us where we can follow your work, not just work on the fire, obviously, but your other observations and your research.
Hireslab.org. We do research on sort of cortical circuits of somatic sensation and neuromodulation, and then I have a Twitter presence, or X presence, I guess, at Andrew Hires. Those are probably the easiest ways to get my thoughts. Thank you so much for having me. I've listened to a few of these podcasts now. The Margulies one was really good, and the Public Adjuster one has been really informative. And I'm really appreciate all three of you guys coming together, giving different perspectives that I think reflect a lot of what the Palisadians are feeling right now, and really providing a great service and the information that you're giving us. Thank you. Glad to be a part.
Thanks, Andrew. We've got to have you on again, and we'll have to analyze that report when it comes out. If it comes out, maybe they'll just bury it, but who knows? They'll come up with something. We're at 3homelessguys.com, and for feedback, suggestions, comments, pod@3homelessguys.com. Until next time, from Joel, Ron, and Oren, stay strong.
Thanks for listening to 3 Homeless Guys. If this episode hit home, please subscribe to our channel. Check out 3homelessguys.com for RSS feeds to your favorite streaming service. Follow us on social and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Drop us a review or shoot us a message at pod@3homelessguys.com. We'd love to hear from you. Stay strong, and we'll catch you next time.